there's one thing that Mel Brooks learned from George Lucas. Money is in the merchandising. So why didn't we get a slew of Spaceball merchandise? Let's find out. Welcome back to the Junk Room, everybody. It's me, the Junkman, coming back at you with yet another video. Can you believe it's time for another video today? We're going to talk Spaceballs. Now, my last video on Spaceballs didn't go over too well because I told people I didn't like it. I'll be honest with you. I liked Spaceballs back in '87 when it was released, but to me, it just doesn't hold up. There's a few good scenes here and there. The alien at the cantina scene, the combing the desert, the watching the movie in the ship before the movie's made or whatever. There are some good, funny scenes, but overall, I just can't get into it anymore. I liked it in '87, and it just really, after the first 20 minutes, when they get to the desert, I toned off. But I often wondered why we didn't get any Spaceball merchandise. Now, there's a scene in the movie where they talk about Spaceball merchandise.
Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made.
And this was always a funny scene because it was true. Lucas made a lot of his money from the merchandise. So you can kind of see where they're going here with this scene here. But why didn't we get Spaceball action figures? Spaceball cereal.
Spaceballs the t-shirt. Spaceballs the coloring book. Spaceballs the lunchbox.
Well, believe it or not, that was called to George Lucas. Now, Mel Brooks was famous for doing parody films. I mean, you got The Bride of Frankenstein, a classic where it kind of did a parody of the old Frankenstein movies. Of course, you got the Blazing Saddle, what is a parody of all the Western movies. You got History of the World, that's a parody of those, those epic films of that time period. High Anxiety, a kind of a parody of Hitchcock movies. And of course, Spaceballs is a parody of Star Wars, although they pick on a lot of other things like Aliens and a couple other movies here and there. But overall, it's a Star Wars parody. Now, Mel Brooks didn't really need to ask Lucas anything about getting the rights to do a parody of Star Wars. I mean, it's free, you can parody, doesn't go against copyright. So he could have made the movie and just released it as it was, but he reached out to George Lucas himself. Now, Mel Brooks might have been just being a nice guy, but he said to Entertainment Weekly that he was a little worried about being sued by Lucas. Lucas was always famous for suing people that did anything that could be related in some way to Star Wars. I mean, he sued the makers of Battlestar Galactica, some toy lines that did science fiction type toys. So Mel Brooks didn't want to upset George Lucas. I mean, he is probably one of the most powerful men, at least in 1987 in Hollywood. So he sent George Lucas a script of Spaceballs. Now, Lucas wrote back to Mel Brooks after looking over the script, had no problem with Mel Brooks making this film. But he did have some demands for Mel Brooks before making the film. He would give his blessing for the parody, and they would even use the help of ILM for the special effects and some of the post-production. But what did Lucas want in return? No merchandise. That's right, Lucas' agreement with Mel Brooks said no merchandise. He couldn't do Spaceballs action figures, couldn't do Spaceballs the video game, Spaceballs the cereal.
Spaceballs the flamethrower. That kids love this one.
Lucas didn't want anything Spaceball related to be released that could be seen as competition with his Star Wars merchandising, which is kind of odd because this is 1987. Star Wars merchandising was dead. There was no Star Wars toys in the store, so it really didn't make much sense. But Mel Brooks probably didn't really care about doing merchandising anyway, but I'm sure the studio, if they knew what a hit Spaceballs was going to be, although it wasn't a huge hit at the time, it's grown on to be a cult classic. So I think the studio would have loved to have some Spaceballs action figures. And I admit, even if I'm not a fan of the movie, I would love to have some Spaceballs action figures, at least the main cast, Dark Helmet. I think it'd be kind of cool sitting back here in the junk room. The only person I know that has Spaceballs action figures is Star Wars collector Gus Lopez, who actually has a couple of the figures that were seen in the movie that Dark Helmet played with. So what did George Lucas think of Spaceballs? Well, after seeing the movie, he told Mel Brooks that he loved it, and that if he took out the comedy, it would be a great adventure movie. And like many fans, I'm sure George Lucas, like you guys, are hoping for Spaceballs 2. We never did get it. Now, I've heard rumors that there was going to be a Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money, which is a pretty clever title, but if you ask me, I would have loved to have seen Spaceballs 3, The Search for 2. I think that would have been a little funnier title, but that's just me. As for a Spaceball sequel, Mel Brooks said he's turned it down whenever he's been asked, that he felt a sequel would just take away from the original. That's something you don't hear from many people in Hollywood. Mel Brooks, I salute you on that one. If only some other creators would say the same thing, we might not have Jaws 4. But there was a Spaceballs animated series. I never saw it. I don't know anyone that saw it, but I think it did get released. Anyway, if you ever wonder why there were no Spaceballs merchandise, now you know. It wasn't because Mel Brooks didn't want to make a lot of money on the merchandising. It was because George Lucas feared he might lose a little bit of money in Star Wars merchandise if there was a dark helmet on the shelf next to a Darth Vader. But again, this was 1987. There were no Darth Vaders on the shelf. So I'm not really sure why Lucas made this rule for Mel Brooks, but he did. But now that it's way past 1987, George Lucas doesn't own Star Wars anymore, I wonder if that contract still holds up. Could we get Spaceballs figures made from a company like Super 7? I would love that if they didn't cost $20 a figure. Well, I want to thank you for watching. In the comments below, let me know, would you have liked Spaceballs action figures? Again, even if I didn't love the movie, I have to admit I would love a series of figures, at least the basic ones. Let me know all that and more in the comments below, and until the next video, we'll talk again.
Junkman.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.